HMS Lowestoffe was a 32-gun fifth-rate frigate of the Royal Navy. Built during the latter part of the 7 Years' War, she went on to see action in the American War of Independence and the French Revolutionary War, and served often in the Caribbean. Lowestoffe has become famous as the ship in which a young Horatio Nelson served shortly after passing his lieutenant's examination. Originally commissioned near the end of the 7 Years' War, Lowestoffe patrolled in British waters until 1773, when it underwent repairs. She was recommissioned in 1777 and served throughout the American War of Independence, including at the Battle of San Fernando de Moa. After the bulk of the fighting ended, she returned home to Portsmouth in 1782, and did not see battle for the next decade. She spent most of her later years in British and Mediterranean waters, winning particular glory for her part in an engagement with two French frigates in 1795. Her final duties were back in the familiar waters of the West Indies, where she was wrecked in 1801 while escorting a convoy in the Caicos Islands. Construction and commissioning. Sir Thomas Slade based his design for Lowestoffe on that of HMS Aurora, which was a former French vessel named Benarquis. Lowestoffe was the only ship built to her design, though over a decade later the Navy would have two more frigates, HMS Orpheus and HMS Diamond, built to a modification of the design of Lowestoffe and Benarquis. She was ordered on the 15th of February 1760 from Thomas West Deptford Dockyard, with West contracted to launch her within 12 months, at a cost of £11.0d per ton. Lowestoffe was laid down on the 9th of May 1760, launched on the 5th of June 1761 and completed by the 1st of August 1761. She officially received the name Lowestoffe on the 28th of October 1760. She had cost a total of £7,715 1s10 to build, coming in just slightly under the contracted price of £7,887. The Navy spent a further £4,281 7s8d on having her fitted out. Career. Commissioned late in the 7 Years' War, she saw little action under her first captain, Walter Stirling, and the Navy paid her off in 1762. Lowestoffe was initially moored at Portsmouth. Then in early 1763 she was armed and stored, sailing on the 26th of July 1763 under the command of her new captain James Baker. After spending some time cruising in the English Channel and stopping neutral merchants for inspections, Baker sailed Lowestoffe to Madeira and then on to the West Indies. She arrived at Carlisle Bay on the 13th of September, and then sailed on to Antigua. During her time at Carlisle Bay, Lowestoffe carried out patrols between Barbados and Antigua. She was part of a squadron under Rear Admiral Tyrrell. 4 vessels of the squadron, Princess Louisa, Lowestoffe, Virgin and Beaver, shared in the prize money arising from the seizure in January and February 1764 of several vessels engaged in illicit trade near Dominica. The seized vessels were the Sarah, Union, Mary Ann, Pastra, Elizabeth, 2 sisters, and June and Betsy. Baker died on the 31st of March 1765. His successor, Joseph Norwood, sailed Lowestoffe home to be paid off in August 1766. Lowestoffe underwent a small repair at Sheerness between December 1766 and April 1767, and after a period out of service was recommissioned again in June 1769 under Captain Robert Carkett. Carkett returned her to the West Indies in October that year, returning in May 1773 to Britain after 4 years at Jamaica. She was paid off in 1773, and reduced to a 28-gun sixth rate. American War of Independence. Lowestoffe now underwent a large repair. She was recommissioned under Captain William Locker in early 1777 and prepared for service in the Leeward Islands. Joining her for this voyage was a young Lieutenant Horatio Nelson, who had passed his examination on the 9th of April, and was joining the Lowestoffe as her second lieutenant. Also serving on the Lowestoffe at this time was Cuthbert Collingwood, who would go on to have an enduring friendship with Nelson, serving with him on a number of occasions, including at the Battle of Trafalgar. The ship sailed in early May, escorting a convoy to the West Indies, where they arrived in mid-July. She was copied at Jamaica and then went on a number of cruises, capturing an American sloop with a cargo of rice in August 1777, a second cruise saw the capture of an American privateer, and a notable incident for Nelson. Lowestoffe sent her boat and first lieutenant to take over the prize, but the seas were too rough to allow the American to be boarded, so the lieutenant returned. Nelson stepped forward and volunteered to make an attempt. He succeeded. On the 25th of March 1778, Lowestoffe captured the sloop Swan, Daniel Smith, master. She was of 60 tons, had a crew of 7 men, and was carrying a cargo of molasses. By the time of Lowestoffe's third cruise, Nelson had taken command of the ship's tender, the schooner Little Lucy. Locker and the Lowestoffe spent the rest of 1778 and the early part of 1779 carrying out routine cruises and patrols, until Captain Christopher Parker replaced him in March 1779. Locker, who had by now been ill for some time, had recommended Nelson to Sir Peter Parker, who found a space for Nelson aboard his flagship, the 50-gun HMS Bristol. Nelson joined her as third lieutenant on the 1st of July 1778. On the 8th of February 1779, Lowestoffe captured the Vigilant, near the Bight of Leogan. The 70-ton sloop was sailing from Dominique to Philadelphia with a cargo of sugar, rum, molasses, coffee, cotton, and salt. John English was her master and she had a crew of 5 men. Lowestoffe became part of Captain John Luttrell's squadron and carried out operations in the Bay of Honduras in October and November 1779. On 17 October, Lowestoffe, together with Pomona, Caron, and Porcupine, participated in the successful British attack on the fort of San Fernando de Romoa. During the attack, Lowestoffe exchanged fire with the fort. While she was doing this, she ran aground. Her immobility made her an easy target for the fort's guns. Eventually boats were able to pull Lowestoffe off, but not before she had sustained extensive damage. She had contributed a landing party to the assault on the fort and in all lost 3 men killed and 5 wounded. As a result of the battle, the British ships captured 2 Spanish prizes with a cargo of bullion worth in excess of $3 million. Lowestoffe and Pomona also shared in the prize money for the St. Domingo and her cargo, which included 124 serins of indigo. On the 26th of March 1780, Lowestoffe captured the small sloop Fortune, of 25 tons, off Cape Francois. Under the command of William Neville, she had a crew of 3 and was sailing from North Carolina to Cape Francois with provisions. Also in early 1800, Lowestoffe captured the Danish brig Diana, which was sailing from St. Domingo to St. Thomas with a cargo of mahogany. Then on the 15th of June, Lowestoffe, Phoenix and Pomona captured the brig Delaware, William Collins, master. She was of 120 tons, armed with guns and had a crew of 53 men. She was sailing from Philadelphia to Port-au-Prince, with a cargo of flour and fish. More importantly, they also captured the French Navy cutter Sanspareil of 16 guns and 100 men, as she was sailing from Martinique to Cap Francais. She was the former British privateer Nonsuch. Later Lowestoffe detained a Danish schooner sailing from Aqaba to Jacmel with a cargo of cattle. She also recaptured the British brig John, which a French privateer had taken, and herself took a Spanish brig sailing from La Guaira to Tenerife with a cargo of cocoa and spices. On the 26th of September, Lowestoffe and Pallas captured two small vessels. One was the sloop Fair Henrietta, of 70 tons, sailing from Philadelphia to Cape Francois with a load of lumber and bricks. The second was the brig St. Salvador, with a crew of 13 men, sailing from New Orleans to Havana with a cargo of lumber. In late 1800 or early 1801, Lowestoffe captured a Spanish brig of 110 tons, laden with sugar and staves. Between 2 and 4 October, Lowestoffe survived a hurricane that badly damaged numerous British warships. The hurricane also caused Barbados, Scarborough and Victor to founder i.e. to be lost at sea with all hands. Captain Christopher Parker transferred into Diamond on the 1st of November 1780. Captain James Cornwallis briefly to replace him on Lowestoffe. Cornwallis requested and received a transfer to HMS Badger 5 weeks later. His successor was Captain Thomas Haynes. Under Haynes, Lowestoffe and Janus captured the sloop Dispatch, Giles Sag, master, on the 18th of January 1781, off Henoge. She was 60 tons, and carried 4 guns and a crew of 14 men. She was on her way from Port-au-Prince to Philadelphia with a cargo of coffee and sugar. Haynes left in May 1781 to take over the 64-gun third-rate Ruby. Her next captain was George Stoney, with Captain Thomas Windsor replacing him on the 31st of January 1782. Windsor sailed Lowestoffe home and paid her off at Portsmouth. She was laid up there for 9 months, before being moved to the River Thames. The years of peace. Robert Batson, of Limehouse, carried out a great repair on Lowestoffe between July 1783 and March 1786. She returned to service in the English Channel in October 1787 under Captain Edmund Dodd. She sailed to the Mediterranean in May 1788, before returning to Britain, where Captain Robert Stopford briefly took command in November 1790. Lowestoffe was paid off later that year and was fitted out at Plymouth between July 1792 and January 1793. Lowestoffe was then recommissioned in December 1792 under Captain William Wolseley. French Revolutionary War. Wolseley sailed to the Mediterranean in May 1793, joining Hood's fleet then blockading Toulon. She joined a flying squadron under Commodore Robert Lindsay to act against French forces in the Mediterranean. On the 30th of September 1793, Commodore Robert Lindsay took his squadron, including Lowestoffe, into the Gulf of San Fiorenzo to attack the redoubt of Fornelli on Corsica. Lowestoffe fired 2 broadsides at a tower at Mortella Point that protected the deep entrance to the Gulf. The fire caused the tower's French defenders to abandon the tower and its 3 guns, allowing a landing party from a Lowestoffe under the command of Lieutenants Francis Annesley and John Gibb to capture the tower. Lindsay, however, delayed his assault on the city until he could bring his larger ships into action. These larger ships bombarded the town from the 1st of October, but sustained considerable damage from the garrison, which forced Lindsay to withdraw. Lowestoffe remained in the area, supporting British operations against the French garrisons on Corsica during 1794. On the 7th of March 1794, Captain Charles Cunningham took over command from Wolseley. A little over a month later, on the 13th of April, Lowestoffe captured the Etoile du Nord, HMS Dido, Aimable and Impérieuse shared in the capture. Lowestoffe then was among the British warships that shared in the capture on the 24th of May of the French brigs Jacobin and Nadine. Captain Benjamin Hallowell replaced Cunningham on the 12th of August. Hallowell commanded Lowestoffe during the naval battle of Genoa on the 14th of March 1795, during which she received some damage from long-range shots from the French fleet. Captain Robert Gambier Middleton replaced Hallowell in June 1795. Dido and Lowestoffe defeat Minerve and Artemis. Admiral Hutham then sent Lowestoffe and the 28-gun Dido under Captain George Henry Towery to reconnoitre the French fleet at Toulon. While off Minorca on the 24th of June 1795, the two frigates encountered two French frigates, the 42-gun Minerve and the 36-gun Artemis. The French were initially wary, but when they realized that they were larger and stronger than the British vessels, the French captains maneuvered to attack. Minerve attempted to run down Dido, but when Dido turned to avoid the impact in Minerve's bowsprit, became entangled in Dido's rigging, costing Dido her mizzenmast and colours. Lowestoffe came along the port side of the Frenchman to discharge a broadside that carried away Minerve's foremast and topmasts, crippling her. Lowestoffe pursued the retreating Artemis, which eventually escaped. Lowestoffe returned to Minerve, firing on her until she struck. Lowestoffe had 3 men wounded, the Dido 6 killed and 15 wounded. Minerve lost about 10% of her crew of over 300 men. The British took Minerve into service as the 38-gun frigate HMS Minerve. The weight of Minerve's broadside alone was greater than that of the two British frigates together, making the battle a notable victory. The Royal Navy duly awarded the two captains a naval gold medal each. In 1847, Naval General Service medals with clasps. Lowestoffe the 24th of June 1795, or Dido the 24th of June 1795, were awarded to 6 surviving crew members. Later service. Captain Robert Plampin relieved Middleton in December 1795, going on to serve with a squadron under Thomas Trowbridge. After a refit in Britain, Lowestoffe escorted convoys in the West Indies. On the 14th of September 1796, she captured the Lesu. Lowestoffe was also among the vessels that in late 1799 captured the Spanish letter of marque Navarre. Diligent was of 150 tons and was armed with 8 guns. She was sailing from Bilbao to Veracruz with a cargo of wine, iron and writing paper. Lowestoffe also shared in the capture of the Spanish Zartan Ambrosia, which was sailing from Cadiz for Veracruz with a cargo of 26.5 tons of quicksilver and 10 tons of writing paper. Lowestoffe alone captured the Spanish brig San Francisco, of 90 tons, sailing from Campeche to Havana with a cargo of sugar and logwood. Loss. Lowestoffe sailed from Kingston, Jamaica on the 22nd of July 1801, and met a convoy 5 days later at Port Antonio. The escorts consisted of Lowestoffe, a cast to the sloop Bonetta, and the schooners Mosquito and Sting. While Lowestoffe was sailing through the Caicos Passage late on the 10th of August, Pamplin realized that the strong currents known to run through the channel had reversed direction and Lowestoffe was running into shallow waters. He attempted to avoid grounding, but to no avail, and the Lowestoffe ran broadside onto Little Anagua Island. A crew threw stores and equipment overboard to lighten the ship, and boats came from other ships in the convoy to try to pull her off. The attempts to refloat her failed and her crew abandoned her by mid-afternoon. The only casualties were 5 men who drowned when the boat capsized in the surf. The change in currents also caused the wreck of 5 merchantmen. In the late afternoon of the 11th of August, Acasta left Bonetta and 3 of her own boats to help the wrecked vessels and then took command of the convoy. The subsequent court-martial at Port Royal on the 3rd of September ruled that a sudden change in the current after dark had caused the loss. The board acknowledged that Pamplin had sailed in a judicious manner and exonerated Pamplin and his officers of blame both for the loss of Lowestoffe and the vessels in convoy. In April 1803, the officers and crew of Lowestoffe and of Bonetta received payment for the salvage of the specie that Lowestoffe was carrying.